Hello. One of the great things about Warhammer Fantasy and 40k is how they've been explored by a number of different, incredibly talented artists, each bringing their own unique style and vision to the world. My guest today is artist Ralph Horsley, who first got started creating complex crowd scenes and cityscapes for Inferno magazine, and whose career has spanned the many worlds of Games Workshop, including Talisman and Warhammer, as well as Dungeons & Dragons, Magic the Gathering, and more recently, Cubicle 7's Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition. We talk about how Ralph first got started as an artist, how his career took off, how he creates those complex tableaus, and some of his most awesome work, including the iconic map of Marienburg from Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 1st edition, as well as so much more about his brilliant work. I'm Jordan, this is Jordan Sorcery, and today I'm in conversation with artist Ralph Horsley. Ralph, thank you for joining me. Really appreciate you coming on to chat about your career and experiences. I like to start just by getting into a bit about the beginning of your journey, I suppose. So maybe like where you first started making art. What made you an artist, I suppose.
Well, I suppose I always remember sitting and sketching and drawing, and that was just what I did. It was just my passion, I suppose, and just to occupy my time. And sat in front of the TV or whatever else, I just have a sketch pad there. And I remember at the time I was just quite keen on sort of doing narrative. So I'd do a picture, and you'd be living that space in your head as you were drawing that narrative be unfolding. And I suppose a lot of the influences growing up in the era I did was maybe World War II stuff or knights and castles. And I'd draw a picture, and that narrative would unfold, and I'd turn over the page and I'd draw the next thing that happened in that scene. And it did tend to be lots of little figures running around doing things, so tanks and planes and all that sort of stuff. But then the big points which I give a lot of credit to in my life were two things. One, at the end of primary school, the last sort of year there, my teacher read The Hobbit to us. And he was great. He did a wonderful impression of Gollum, and I remember his Adam's apple bobbing up and down. Anyway, that triggered me to read The Lord of the Rings, which completely blew my mind. And then shortly after that, my friend, well, maybe it might have been a couple of years after that, but my friend got one of the very first copies of D&D for his birthday, and then we started playing D&D, and that suddenly brought those two things together, because that world of Lord of the Rings, which I just loved inhabiting that imaginative space whilst reading it, I could then play in it. You could be a ranger, you could be these characters, and then of course seeing the artwork in the books, and that was then the focus of what my drawings were. They were no longer World War II sort of comics I've grown up reading, whatever else. They were now D&D. They were role playing game artwork. That was my inspiration. They were what my character had done in the previous session we played. And then shortly after that, I got AD&D, as it was at the time, which was, I remember, it was an expensive birthday present. It took me about a year and a half, I think, Christmas, birthday, to get all three books, because they were chunky things at the time. Yeah. And then, of course, the artwork and that will completely influenced me. And I remember, being gifted a dip pen by my grandmother, and that was it. I was doing black and white line work, and that was it. I wanted to draw in that style of that first D&D books, really. Yeah.
That's fantastic, though. So did you then did you study art? Did you sort of formalize?
No. Well, I grew up in Kendal, which is quite a small town in the Lake District, and there was one game shop there, but really downstairs it sold prams and dolls, and upstairs it sold Airfix model kits and stuff like that, and had a tiny, tiny role-playing section where they bought a few miniatures in, and they had copies of White Dwarf. And actually in the back of White Dwarf, I realised that they still did the classified ads, and you could get fanzines. And suddenly, oh wow, this is exciting, because I was used to mail order, because living in Kendal, you had to get everything mail order. All the D&D books came mail order. So I sent off for some of these fanzines, and I realised quite quickly, if you contributed, you'd get them for free. So suddenly, all this artwork I've been doing with my D&D characters, I could send off to these fanzines. They'd publish them. I'd get a free copy of the fanzine, and then I started making my own fanzine. And when I went away to university, which I didn't study art, I studied English literature and librarianship. I was I was passionate about art, but I didn't see any future in it. I got an A at O level, but an E at A level because I don't think they really liked the fantasy subject matter I was doing. Um, and I just didn't see. I just at the time I just didn't really see what a career in art was like and how you went about doing it. And there was various reasons anyway why I ended up doing the course I did. But during that time, I kept doing my artwork, kept doing my fanzine, and I had my first piece published in a short-lived role-playing game magazine in the UK, whose name escapes me right now. But uh, and
Do you
I,
remember when it would have been?
I mean, it was a dedicated role-playing game magazine. I have got it. I did track it down at some point, but I can't remember offhand now what it was. But it only lasted for about a year. You know, it was one of these short-lived magazines that,
Sure.
you know. But I remember I got 50 quid for drawing an orc.
Right.
I think maybe it's part of the reason they went under because I think they were paying the rates at the time maybe a bit high for the quality of what was being delivered. But regardless, I suddenly thought, oh wow, you know, you could actually make money out of this. So when I left university, I decided I was going to try and make some sort of career out of doing art. But at the time, again, I didn't really see games as a route through, and especially I suppose stuff was published in America, and this is pre-internet, pre-email days. I mean, the idea of working for an American company was completely out, you know, just couldn't picture doing that basically. But what I did think was doing comic work. So I did quite a lot of comic work and not really much for a professional level, maybe semi-professional level. I was producing some of my own comics. I was doing work for other people, a lot of inking, you know, various things. I was never very keen on superheroes, which was maybe a bit of a drawback, but I thought I could do European style comics. But I did that for quite a while, trying to break through into that and had some sort of low level success, I suppose. But the key thing about that was that I was spending a lot of time doing it. And, you know, and I was augmenting that by trying to do some miniature painting and things like that. So, you know, I was trying to run a business full time. So I was working hard, and I think doing comics and producing that much artwork, because a page of comic art, you've got to do a lot in it.
Sure, yeah.
And it really, really honed my anatomy skills, I think. And it really, although they were still very weak, but it gave me a lot of practice, basically. And then really out of the blue, James Wallace, who at the time was owned and ran Hogshead Publishing, who I'd got to know through the fanzines several years ago, contacted me out of the blue and said, would I like to do some work with him for Hogshead Publishing? He was doing a parody D&D game, which in the end never got published, but I got work on that with him. And through that, he also had the license for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. He'd got that. And it coincidentally, at the same time, Andy Jones at the Games Workshop was setting up the Black Library. And these things, it all came together. It was a sort of perfect storm for me. And I got work on the first issue of Inferno with Andy Jones and Mark Gascoigne at the Black Library and Games Workshop. And that really was the breakthrough for me, because that was, you know, I mean, James he's a very good publisher. He paid a decent rate, but Games Workshop paid obviously that a little bit more, but also it was the kudos and experience that came with that. Okay. So and also suddenly I realized that much as I love comics and graphic storytelling, really my passion was what it had always been, which was illustration and fantasy art. And the fact you could spend, you know, several days on one picture rather than having to do several panels on one page of comic art, and the subject matter appeals me more. Anyway, that was really, as I say, the first step into really thinking, oh gosh, actually maybe I can make a career out of this, and actually maybe game art is the way I can go with this.
Sure. Yeah.
But at the time, it was still very much just black and white artwork I was doing.
Right.
You know, but that was what was published in Inferno magazine, and
But then some of those pieces in the early Infernos were quite intricate and complex, right? Because you did the siege of Gisero, the Britannia.
Yes, that was one of my first ones I did. Yes, I think that was the very first. That was one of the first pieces. I remember there was that, and there was the cutaway of the steam tank, and things like that. Originally, well, I think in some ways I was always very. In some ways, I think I put more detail in it made the work better, which in some regards is true, but I think also it could hide a lot of draft errors. You know, I mean,
Right. Yeah.
in a way, if you're not that good at sort of some of the anatomy and things like that, when you put lots of detail in things, you know, it sort of carries it, doesn't it? It does carry it. I mean, maybe that's a bit unfair on myself, but I love doing that stuff. That was the sort of thing that I enjoyed doing. So it came naturally to me to put that sort of level of detail in and work
Yeah.
quite fine and detailed and get those, you know. I remember I had a set of rotring pens and it was like 0. 0.1, 0. 0.2, 0.3. You know, it was like, right, how small can I get this? What detail can I
Yeah.
put in?
Because how big would that piece have been then? So that was a double page spread, the Siege in Inferno. How big would you have been working on the
I
original?
I think the original was probably about A3,
Right.
something like that. Yeah, so I think if the magazine was, what was it, A5 or something?
Something
So
like that, yeah.
each page would have been. I think, yeah, each page in the end I ended up doing sort of like A3. But but the time as well. I mean, I mean, I learned a lot doing it. I mean, it was a great experience, and an incredible amount of trust really, because I didn't really have, you know, I didn't really have a CV behind me. I didn't
Mm.
have a lot of work, and I'm really appreciative to Andy Jones and Mark Gascoigne, who are the, you know, the editors there, and other people I worked with for you know, and James Wallace, of course, for giving me that opportunity and that trust really that I could deliver. And I know at times I certainly did. Well, I still get it now. That was the whole imposter syndrome thing and
Right.
anxiety about whether the work was good enough. But I was certainly passionate to do it. Um, and at first, the initial pieces I did were uh, Jonathan Green, who you may know through he wrote
Sure.
novels for Games Workshop, but latterly he's done fighting fantasy stuff and whatever else. He
Mm.
wrote some of the initial features that I was illustrating. So, you know, he wrote the Siege of Gizero or the I can't remember, there was some dwarf stronghold, something Kazakh
Yeah.
Grund or something like that. He
Yeah.
wrote those pieces. But I think I did, I don't know, 3 or 4 with him, something like that. It wasn't many, but then he got a commission to work on a novel for
Mm.
Games Workshop for Black Library, and he was still teaching full time. So he didn't have time to write these pieces anymore, and they just turned around and said, "Well, you write them."
Right.
So you know, I had no published writing credits to my name, but I did have a degree in English literature, so I felt confident I could do something. And you know, and I must admit, I wasn't that familiar with the Warhammer lore. You know, I liked the setting, but I didn't play the games at the time.
Mm.
As I say, my background was D&D, and I was on a low income, so although I did a lot of tabletop gaming and war gaming, I had done. I'd never gone and collected, you know, Warhammer
Sure.
really. You know, it'd been a bit out of my budget at the time. At the point of, you know, as I say, it was relatively low income. Well, very low income, really. You know, um, so I just had to come up with these ideas and do this. I did. So I suppose I played to my strengths. I would try and do illustrated pieces that had big battle scenes in the middle of them, and you know, and whatever else, and that was really how it developed from there. Really doing those,
Amazing.
and then realizing that actually, you know, where the future wasn't in black and white line work; it was in color work.
Right.
You know, and I wanted to do the covers for them, and I wanted, you know, so then I was starting to teach myself to paint properly. You know, I'd obviously done some painting, but really my experience in painting was from miniature painting. And it was actually most of my early work was done with citadel miniatures paints
Right.
because that's what I had to hand. They were affordable. And I was very fortunate in that the guy who was a manager at the Games Workshop in Leeds, when he found out I was working for the Black Library, gave me staff discount. So that was fabulous. So I could go and buy, you know, little miniature paints at half price, effectively, or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Getting stuff. This was very nice of him, but it really fueled the ability to do that.
Mm.
And I did get to do some novel covers, and I'm trying to think of the order of sequence of things. And of course, then I started working with James Wallace on doing the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay as well.
Right.
I mean, other projects spilled off from that as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
that was the start there. Yeah,
I
definitely.
mean, it's really interesting about the sort of move into color then. Is that because you like I mean obviously I imagine it's better paid than some of the line work, but was there also like an opportunity to express yourself or in sort of is there an artistic element to it that's interesting to explore?
Yes, definitely. I feel that now. I mean, I think at the time I was still very wedded to black and white line work. I felt there was and I still do. I feel there's I don't know, some sort of purity to it. There's something
Mm.
about it that I really like it. But I suppose two things were changing. One was that actually colour printing was becoming cheaper and
Mm.
more affordable. So there was a trend in general to have, I mean, interior illustrations in colour. And now actually, although you still get black and white illustrations in a lot of games books, it is seen as more unusual. Really, you'd expect to see colour, and I certainly like Dungeons and Dragons led the trend in that, where their
Mm.
books quickly moved to all colour interior illustrations. And yes, and it was a financial thing and a kudos thing. You'd rather do a cover than an interior illustration when you realise that the pay rate was quite a bit more.
Yeah.
Then then yeah, there was definitely incentive to do that. I realised that I couldn't just keep doing what I did. You've got to evolve, and that's creatively and commercially, I suppose.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and yes,
Sure, yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, one of the pieces that you did for Hog's Head that I think is quite iconic is the map of Marienburg, right?
yes. Well, that was a labour of love and intensity. I
Right.
tell you,
I'll
yeah,
bet.
yeah. Doing all those buildings. I mean,
Yeah.
I am still proud of that piece. I mean, obviously, I do things differently now. I think you learn economies, maybe, or
Mm.
not that you would put less detail in, but you realise there's better ways to paint. Use some
Right.
bigger brushes and things like that. Because that was the thing as well. I mean, people I think have an advantage if you're starting out now in art. There's a lot of access to information on the internet,
Mm.
which is great, absolutely great. You can see lots of other artists' work. You can go to forums, you can see tutorials, you can go on YouTube, all kinds of different. But for me, really, there was the local library.
Right.
Was my source of how do you paint, what do you do, what is acrylic painting, how do you do it. So really, it was completely self-taught, and a lot of it did come from miniature painting,
Mm.
and I did maybe use too small brushes and whatever else, but I suppose I got there, but I realized that maybe in some ways I made the work harder for me than it could have been.
Right. Yeah, because
But
it must have been a big investment of time as well to do a piece of that sort of size and detail.
it was, but I've never shied away from that. I've always felt that you want to do the best work you can, and actually, if you're given opportunities like that, rather than going, okay, and to be fair, James always paid decent rates, so
Mm.
this is not anything to do with that. But I'm not someone who goes, oh, okay, I'm only getting X amount for this, therefore I'm only going to give it X amount of time. I thought, right, this is a good opportunity to do something, and I'm going to do the best. This is going to be a showcase piece, and the fact that you still talk about it now goes, well, it did it. It did that job, didn't it?
It did.
It was a showcase piece for me, And so the amount I got paid now, I mean, I can't remember what I got paid. That's irrelevant. But the fact that it's made that impact and you're still talking about it means I did the job I wanted to do, which was, show I can do this sort of work, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and that's important to me. That's why I say you look at those, as you say, the Inferno pieces, and yeah, they maybe some of them are sort of insanely detailed in some respects, but I would say this is the best I can do. This is what I can do. Hire me, give me more work.
Yeah.
And I think if you do that, good things come from it. Really.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And yeah, it is, they're memorable pieces and they are absolutely that calling card. I'm
Yeah.
intrigued, but just when you were talking there about like how, learning the craft and sort of, the libraries where you're having to get this sort of stuff. What was it like in terms of, I mean, did you have like a peer network? Because I imagine it's quite a solitary pursuit, a lot of
It,
it.
it, it is, and actually at the time, very isolated. I think I'd maybe met one other person in Leeds that through a friend of a friend that did comic art,
Right.
but he'd just done a couple of pieces for 2000 AD or something. I forget his name now. I never really got to know him. So it was only actually through Games Workshop that I was invited to a games day
Hmm.
where I was asked to go and do some signing. That I met any other artists that were trying to do the same, that were doing the same thing as me for the
Right.
first time. So that was quite a long way into my, you know,
Hmm.
nascent career, really, that I ever met anyone else that was even, as I say, aspiring to do it or doing it.
Hmm.
So yeah, it was quite isolating, and I must admit, my 20s were quite tough in a lot of ways. I did really think, have I shot myself in the foot here? Have I made myself unemployable? My CV doesn't look great if I want to go and get an office job or something.
Sure.
You know what I mean? But I was happy to make that sort of that equation where, okay, I'm doing something I'm passionate about, and okay, maybe I'm not making the best living or whatever else, or I'm having to make sacrifices for that, but I'm following a passion. I've got to give this a go, really. And I'm very thankful that actually I'm in the position I am now, and it's worked out all right, really.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one of the things I'm curious as well about it, and I think that this is tied to what you were saying about your original passion for narrative. But as you moved into cover work and the sort of color work as well, I'm thinking of the second edition Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay covers that you were doing, the sort of Tome of Salvation and
Yeah,
Tome of
they were
Damnation.
fantastic. Yeah,
Incredible,
yeah.
incredible covers, like wrap around, really, and again, intricate, loads of detail, loads of story in those covers, like really,
Yes.
really good stuff. I mean, what was the process like for making those?
Well, I suppose the process in some ways was similar to the other piece I'd done, which is something I try and do with my work is hopefully you've got an initial read and you go, okay, I don't know, let's think of something like the Toe of Corruption or something. Okay, someone's
Sure.
summoning a demon of the niche or whatever, and that you can get that the minute you see it, but then you look at it and you can see other little things in there, other little narratives and little stories, and that's I suppose what I want the work to be like or to
Mm.
do, and so you know. I mean, I can talk about my process. I go about creating a PC1 tour. Is that a bit early in the interview? Do you want to
No,
come
let's
on
do
that
it. Yeah,
later?
let's explore it.
Well, it has evolved. I must admit that. I mean, something I'd always do is people would either call it a thumbnail. I mean, I tend to refer to it as a composition sketch these days because I might do a thumbnail, but really that is just like a tiny little doodle,
Mm.
5 minute. But really, when I come to try out ideas for composition now, they are more resolved than that. But
Right.
at the time, they maybe weren't very resolved. Maybe they were almost more of a thumbnail because I wasn't, I suppose, confident in my drawing, and I wasn't maybe very competent either. So I felt often if I drew something once and was happy with it, it was very hard for me to felt it was hard for me to recreate that.
Right.
And also I had an impatience. I felt like it was wasted time. So
Right.
really, I wanted to be working on the final piece, and so I've always painted over my sketches. So I wanted to sketch it, and a lot of those things developed as I was sketching it. So I'd come up with ideas. There's a bit of space over there. What do I put in that to fill it out? They'd be the main. I'd have maybe had the general idea of the main components. Like, there's the demon there, and
Mm.
there's that guy there sat reading a book or something. But then, oh
Sure.
right, but I can put a pile of books over here, or I can put a rat over there, or someone in the background, picking the nose or something.
Yeah.
Whatever you think is going to be fun or feeding from out at the time. Um, and similarly with the painting, really, although I may have an idea in my head of what I was going to do, I pretty much developed the palette on the page, which
Mm.
is a really poor way of doing it. So now actually, I've I've got a lot more structure to what I do. So I will do a series of composition studies, but they will be more resolved.
Right.
They will be not finished pieces, but a lot more readable. I will work out more of the elements, and then once I've sketched it, I'll scan that back in. I'll print that. I'll do a series of color studies. I mean, they'll be scaled down,
Mm.
so whatever. If that's a final painting, oh, there's your cat just appeared.
Yeah.
Great. I will do a scaled down print out, laser print, and I'll paint over that with acrylics. And I've realized now actually that rather than that being more time,
Mm.
it actually saves you time
Right.
because you've got broken down the decisions. So rather than having to make all the decisions on the page at the final thing, you've done it, and you can try things out. If I do a color study now and go, oh, I thought purple and green was going to look really cool for this, but actually, oh god, it looks awful. Well, no matter, I can toss that to one side. I can print another one out, and an hour later, I've got, oh right, okay, well, red and orange works much better for that.
Mm.
Whilst in the past, maybe I'll start going on something and go, oh, I don't know, this is really going how I want it. I'd have to adjust it as went on, which is not the way to work. So
Right.
that was an immaturity, really, in me, and a lack of confidence. So now I suppose my drawing skills are much better. I feel if I draw something in the composition study, then I can replicate that in the sketch,
Right.
and then I can carry that through to the final painting. So
Mm.
yeah, it is experience, really.
That's fascinating though as well, just in terms of that process. How much stuff, like it sounds like, emerges, how much story emerges from the composition and emerges on the page as you're working through it?
Uh, a lot of it, the main elements would be in the composition study. But if
Mm.
let's say it's a I don't know, a crowd scene,
Hmm.
which obviously I like doing crowd scenes. Then I probably would maybe have a few key elements in the composition or the flow of the piece, but I like to leave some scope in it. I mean, it wouldn't be completely resolved,
Right.
partly because it's just maybe very time consuming to do that for every single figure. You've got 50 figures in a piece or something, to do that all of the composition sketch study stage. That's more about where are the key elements going to be and where does things fit together. So whether someone's, as you say, over in the corner reading a book or over there, that's maybe not that important to the narrative. I know there's a figure there, but I can decide what they're doing later, or I can decide actually I'm going to put two figures there rather than one. So I like to leave a bit of scope at the sketch stage.
Right.
So, yeah.
Do
But the
you,
key elements will be decided. Yeah.
right. And would those key elements be part of the brief as well then? So if you were
Well, absolutely. That's the one thing I would nail. Yes,
right,
yes.
sure.
That's the bit you've got to nail really. The
Because
composition,
would it be for like the
especially
tome of corruption? Would it be literally right? We want a demon being summoned. That's what the cover is going to be. Go from there, or would you get more detail?
that was a loose brief. So
Right.
there was trust. Other times, I suppose a better example because maybe say talking about say something like Dungeons and Dragons. They might say, okay, we want a fighter and they're wielding a flaming sword, and we want a cleric who's casting a spell, and we want blah, blah we want these four figures, and they're fighting these two demons, a bone devil or whatever. We're fighting this
Sure.
in a cavern with an altar with and actually
Right.
that's part of the thing I really like about my work is having a brief and saying, okay, I've got all these different elements. How can I bring them together and make a strong composition that tells a narrative that's cool?
Right.
That's fun. I mean, these days I can come up with my own ideas for my work on my own. I've got plenty of ideas and I'd like to do more personal work. But certainly when I was younger, I think I found it hard just to start with nothing and go, okay, what do I do? Because it's,
Mm.
and I liked being given a brief because it really spurred me on and gave me that focus. And also, I think getting any brief is great for learning the craft because, and this is something I'm very happy if I'm at a show or whatever else for people to come and chat to me and show me their portfolio and talk about making art. And invariably, the thing I'll see is a single figure with limited background, and of course that's an easy thing to do. And it's we fall into what you enjoy doing is because what's easy to do in a
Mm.
way. So I always say to people, right, do stuff that's hard. Draw a horse, have three figures that are interacting, give more background, try and do different perspective, do things that are hard. And actually, that's the nice thing about giving a brief is, oh my God, I've got to draw a horse. And I don't know
Yeah.
if I know how to draw horses or or what does a Viking longship look like? Or, all these different sort of things that force you to expand your repertoire, expand your craft. And of course, that's the advantage, I suppose, for myself,
Mm.
having worked for 4 decades, is that I've drawn a lot of different things. So, maybe some things are a little bit stored in the visual memory there, or you've go, okay, I've tackled this before. How do I do it then? How can I improve it this time?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's an interesting point actually, just around like the referencing. I imagine this might have been a thing more early on in your career, but would you have to go if you're working on an IP like Warhammer or Dungeons and Dragons, and you need to put something in the brief? Would you go and take a look at how an orc has been represented before across?
That's absolutely important to any IP. That's one of the key things actually when
Right.
working on any product, and especially say working with Games Workshop when that was absolutely right. This is what an orc looks like. This is what a goblin looks like, because that's what gives consistency across the
Sure.
game. Someone might have a different art style, and we can say John Blanche is different from Karl Kopinski or something, but their orcs are still Games Workshop orcs, are
Yeah.
Warhammer orcs, aren't they? And that's the important thing. So actually learning to, and I remember certainly the other day, make it a bit more spiky, that was the sort of feedback. A lot of the time, the feedback from art direction isn't like, oh, we don't think it's a very good composition. That's actually very, very, very rare you'd ever get that sort of feedback. But what the sort of feedback is like, oh, actually, that our fighters look more like this, or our
Right.
goblins need to look a bit more like this, or change that armor because that looks a bit more dwarvish rather than elven. I
Right.
mean, you wouldn't do something maybe that simple, but that's the way it is, and you can see that is the art direction to keep everything consistent within that world. But that's
Sure.
quite fun. I quite like working with that, and there's freedom within that. Obviously, we know, you know, like dwarves have got maybe quite a sort of angular, sort of right angled, chunky sort of style, but you can play with that. You can have fun with that. It's not
Mm.
like this helmet's got to look exactly like that other helmet, but it's got to look within the same culture,
Yeah.
and that's the fun. That's so you do have a lot of flexibility. It's like okay, you know, we know what the cultural tropes are for orcs, so have fun with that.
Mm.
You know, it doesn't have exactly the same shoulder pad as the other one, but you've got to have the idea that's their look. You know,
Sure.
it's yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. So what's it like then when you're tackling maybe a less defined universe then? So thinking about like you did all the covers for, or most of the covers for the Talisman fourth edition, I think, or the different game,
Yes,
right?
yes, I did a lot of
So
that.
was that an opportunity to, like create more of a look and a feel for that world?
Well, the only thing I'd say about that was that in some ways the backgrounds are, I hate to use the word, but a bit generic. It's like it's a mountain or it's a
Sure.
river or it's a city. You know, it's a medieval city. So really, the thing was, I suppose the scope there was with the characters, but
Mm.
unfortunately, and this is something I would have liked to have had more control over. The characters were done by another artist,
Right.
so I was given effectively all the reference of basically their art and
Right.
said, now you've got the whatever the druid, the priest, the witch, whatever these characters are for that particular expansion.
Mm.
They're okay. Maybe they're fighting a giant eagle or dragon, and maybe have scope on what the giant eagle and the dragon look like, or
Mm.
what the castle was like, or something. But the actual characters were given to me and had to be represented the same.
Right.
Which, to be honest, at times I did feel. Oh, I feel like I made these a bit cooler.
Mm.
you know, yeah, you know, but you can't change them. You know, that's the way it is, and even the palette and things like, okay, they've got to have that red cloak or whatever. But
Yeah.
that, so that was the only thing with the talisman. Actually, I would have liked to. I would have preferred it in some ways if they'd done it the way around. I'd got the covers,
Right.
designed the characters, and then the other artist gone right now. I've got to take those and make the card art out of them.
Sure.
So hey, that's the job, and you're used to using reference all the time from other artists. It's the nature of the industry really, and I have no complaint about that really. But
Sure.
sometimes you go, yeah, I could make that a bit cooler. But as I sort of say, going back to like the dwarf thing and the orc thing, you can do that. You can go, okay, well, as long as it looks culturally the same, I can make it look as cool as I think it should be.
Yeah.
As long as it's recognizable. So yeah. Yeah, but so sometimes you have more freedom and sometimes you have more constraints. But the key thing is it's got to look like the IP.
Yeah. Do you have any favorites from your, like, even just subjects that you really enjoyed drawing, whether it was orcs or dwarves or whatever, from that
I
time
do.
in Warhammer?
Uh, it's a good one. Well, I think I did like doing the big scenes, and I do like
Yeah.
orcs and goblins. They're just fun, really. And you can, yeah, you can play with them. I think even our orcs and goblins and stuff like that are my favourite in some way. Just because I think you'd be playful with them. I think
Mm.
they've got humour in them, and I think there is humour in my artwork. I think I have to rein it in a little bit. Sometimes I think I can be not necessarily whimsy, but yeah, I definitely think there's humour aspects of my work. Really, yeah.
Yeah. So then, once obviously you've done a lot of stuff across Black Library and for Games Workshop, but then you've also moved into other famous settings as well. So you mentioned that you've done some Dungeons and Dragons stuff, you've done some Magic the Gathering stuff. How did those worlds and IPs and companies, I guess, how is that different to the work that you'd been doing up to that point for GW?
Um, well, I mean, in essence, the work is sort of the same. You get a brief and you do the art. So
Sure.
in that sense, it's the same. I guess for me, the working on Dungeons and Dragons was a bit of a sort of childhood dream, really, because
Yeah.
as I said, explained earlier, that was my first passion. So there was something to be seen for that, and maybe as well, there's a bit of which is I really like working on the Games Workshop stuff. There is maybe a bit of a hierarchy almost within the industry that they gave me that sort of CV to then move on to something like Magic the Gathering, which I suppose has probably got within sort of gaming, fantasy, tabletop fantasy gaming art. That's a bit of a long tag, but has probably got the highest reputation in terms of like the highest quality of art. So getting to work on that, I've come to appreciate now, though I didn't necessarily appreciate at the time. Has got kudos about it. Has got and the rates of pay were better as well.
Right.
That's the other thing. Wizards of the Coast for both Dungeons and Dragons and Magic the Gathering paid more than working on Games Workshop. And they also had some other freedoms in that you were allowed to make prints. You see, Games Workshop have always had a fairly restrictive contract. So even though I can obviously, because I work traditionally, I retain the original artwork. They obviously, any company owns all the rights to reproduction or whatever else, but their contracts will maybe allow certain freedoms within that. So you might be obviously allowed to use it for self-promotion on social media. You might be allowed to put it into your own art book or contribution to other art books, art directories with certain restrictions. Say, because I have done my own art book, and say Wizard of the Coast, so yes, you can put D&D and Magic the Gathering art in, but no more than 2/3 of the book. Right. So what you can't do is like, this is a book of Magic the Gathering art.
Sure.
I can do a book of this of Ralph Horsley art, which is what I did. I didn't want to do otherwise, but and certain companies also let you make prints and maybe other merchandise, depending on that. But Games Workshop was very much like, no, you can't make any prints. You can't do anything like that.
Right.
And actually, when I did do my art, but that was one thing that is a disappointment because it came out 2 or 3 years back. It was a career retrospective. It's a 130-page hardbound glossy book. I'm really proud of it. But the one thing I couldn't get is permission from Games Workshop to put any Warhammer work in.
Oh, right.
Which is I feel really sad about that. But I just couldn't get them to agree. In fact, actually even getting any communication from the legal department proved pretty much impossible. Much as I tried, and I did try. And I think I got a couple of email responses and we'll look into it and that was it. It was just clammed up, which is a real shame, really.
Yeah, that is.
But hey ho. So, there was other reasons for me. There was various reasons for moving on to different companies, really. And of course, in time as well, there were internal changes. The Black Library changed. They stopped doing Inferno. They stopped doing Warhammer Monthly. Things like Talisman was then licensed out to Fantasy Flight Games. So, they'd had a board game department effectively within, I don't know quite what the organisation was, but within the Black Library. So Jake Thornton was the chap at the time. So I did some board game artwork for him, which sadly never got published. So there was an orc racing game. I've still got the original artwork in my sort of studio, which is with a massive piece of art like this of a racetrack with lots of orc fans waving things and throwing things.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. That was a massive piece. I have shown it online somewhere.
Right.
There was another one which was sort of like I'm trying to think. Well, it would have been like a far future, sort of 40k-ish, more like Necromunda type sort of racing games. They did basically race boards, so there was going to be boards that you could obviously move, run in front of them, race down the road. It reminded a little bit of that board game Thunder Road, if you ever come across that. But and I did all those various counters and card designs and card art. So I did stuff like that for Games Workshop.
Right.
And that just never got published. And then they shut that
whole... it's in a vault somewhere.
Well, they've got it. Yeah, I've got some of the original artwork, but they've got it in their archive somewhere, presumably. Never got published.
Right.
But I did other things as well. I did stuff. I did ship designs for Battlefleet Gothic, and I did a lot of stuff actually for Games Workshop. And then of course there's a spin-off. The main thing that I really learned to paint on was when Dire Wolf got the TCG and did Warcry and Horus Heresy. TCG. Sorry, Sabretooth. Sorry, not Dire Wolf. Sabretooth. Sorry, misremembered. That was really how I learned to paint.
Right.
That was because that was producing quite a lot of art, and it was actually really off the back of that I ended up working with Wizard of the Coast.
Right.
And it was very fortunate actually. I met, and you were asking me when I first met other creators, and it was at a games day. I met Kev Walker for the first time.
Right.
And he's a lovely chap, and he said, he obviously. That was the way. At any of these events, if you go out to any event, you get to talk to other creators and
Mm.
maybe find out what they're doing and whatever. So he said, "Oh, you should work for Magic the Gathering." I said, "Oh, well, I'd like to, but I don't know that I'm good enough for it." He said, "Oh, no, I think you are," and he actually recommended me to the art director at the time. So actually, I started working on Magic the Gathering before I worked on Dungeons and Dragons.
Right.
And yeah, and I'm very appreciative that he did that. It really made a huge impact on my career, really.
Yeah. That's
That was
great.
that was back in 2002 or 2001. I can't remember, but very early 2000s.
Sure.
Anyway,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, actually, I'm interested there just around because obviously working on the card games, so whether that is Warcry or Magic the Gathering, do you have to approach your composition in a different way? Because obviously it's going to be so much smaller than it if it's going to be in a book
Well,
or
that was something I learned. I had to, again, as with any of these things, you sort of learn on the job in a way. And I did come to realize, yes, some of the detail that I was maybe put into cover pieces, weren't going to be produced at that scale,
Hmm.
and maybe weren't going to read as well. But again, that's part of learning. It's part of learning the craft. That yes, I mean, there's still quite large pieces. I mean, I probably worked larger now than I did then, but the card art, as you know, tiny little card. But I would have done at least A4. I mean, now I imagine the gathering cards are probably nearer sort of A3, if not bigger. Actually, some of them might at times, and also because I've worked in different medium. I was working solely in acrylics at the time, and I've worked in oils subsequently.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
There was another project that you've done with Wizards, which was the Lords of Waterdeep game, and you did the
Yes, that was
that
really
and stuff.
nice. That was their first Euro style board game, and it's
Yeah,
proven hugely popular. And actually, I play it. It's a really
great game.
nice game. It's a great game. It's
Yeah,
tight. It always produces really tight results.
yeah,
It's a worker placement sort of
yeah,
game. But yeah, I mean, I play. I'm a huge gamer. That's the thing really that my career has fed off all my passions of gaming, fantasy, art. It's a perfect coalescence of those things really for me.
yeah.
And so yeah, getting to work on that board game was really nice. And yeah.
It must be fun to. Like, I mean, do you yeah, like? I'm going to sit down and play a game, and then oh wow, it's got my art on. That's fun.
Yeah, no, I always feel a bit funny about that really. It's a bit of an odd one. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, more recently, you've been working on the Warhammer Fantasy World again with Cubicle 7. So you've done a
I
load of
have,
stuff for
I
them.
have. I haven't worked in the last couple of years, but I certainly did quite a lot on the last edition. Yes,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, and that was really nice to go back. So I think I've worked on every edition of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay in some form or other. I think the
right.
very first edition, I think I maybe the last supplement. I did a couple of interior pieces or something like that. It was, but I have worked on every edition of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and I really loved that continuity and that involvement
Yeah.
in a product. Yeah, I do take satisfaction in that. Really, it's nice to go there and to revisit that world and I feel, of course, that my quality of what I'm doing is better. So there's
Mm.
an evolution there as well with it, which I really like the sort of covers I did with Hogshead. The as you say, the Tome of Salvation, I think they were, certainly some of my best work at the time. I still think they hold up as strong pieces. But I'd like to think what I'm doing now is that bit more accomplished.
Right.
So yeah, to get back and revisit that world has been really nice actually. And doing the whole series of the Enemy Within, because that's essentially what I did with them. I did do the core rule book. I did the the sort of homage to the original Warhammer Fantasy
Mm.
Roleplay, sort of that cover, and then there was the starters. They were great pieces to do, and then to do the Enemy Within. So that's effectively what I did with them.
Yeah.
And the Enemy Within was a campaign I'd played myself as well. I have played Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and
Yeah.
I love the world setting, and yeah. So to sort of yeah, I guess really it ties back to what I said at the start. You asked what my original art was, my original focus, which I said was drawing my role playing characters.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I was doing for those one fantasy players. I was basically drawing my drawing the games I've played, illustrating the games I've played. So yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah, that's quite magical actually, isn't it? To think that you were starting from that place of just well, I love playing these games, so I'm gonna illustrate them to a
Well,
place
yeah,
where, yeah, you're
yeah,
literally doing that
yeah,
for real. And yeah,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
great.
yeah. You know, because as I say, there were the triggers. You know, like, oh, what did my character do? And I was like, oh, they fought an orc, or they got gobbled up by a gelatinous cube or something. So, oh, okay, I was going to draw a picture of them being swallowed by a gelatinous cube. You know, whatever it was, and I guess that's the thing. Like in doing I forget what the first supplement's called now. Oh, the three-legged goblin running away from the fair.
Right.
Shadows over
Bogenhafen.
Goblin. Yeah, that's right. To do that and having played that with the goblin running through the fair, it was great actually. Sort of bring that to life and yeah.
That's brilliant. Yeah. I mean, is there anything that you're working on now in the sort of in a similar space that you can share and talk about, or
What you mean in games I've played, all sort of things,
just
or
yeah? I mean, in the sort of in the
uh,
worlds of fantasy.
well, I mean, I'm still very fortunate. I'm still working with Wizards of the Coast on both Magic the Gathering and Dungeons and Dragons at
Mm.
present. And I'm working on a really cool Dungeons and Dragons project, which I would love to be able to tell you about. I can't, but you know, that would be really interesting when it comes out. And that, I suppose, I can probably maybe I can mention that, you know, that does involve doing some black and white line work as well.
Great.
So you know, that's been really fun for me to revisit that medium.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and I'm trying to, you know, and I've got other projects with other companies on the go. There's always different things, and I'm going to try and find more time this year to do some more personal pieces and pieces that have got lots of figures and big
Mm.
things, you know, which do hark back to those early pieces of Inferno, because I love doing that, you know, and certainly, like I say, on this latest project with Dungeons and Dragons, the art director Kate Irwin, you know, when she asked whether I would like to work on the project and if there's anything I particularly like to do, I said, yeah, well, you know me, give me some crowd scenes and multiple figures. I love doing that, you know, and that's what I've got. And that's maybe something which has served me well in my career, is that I, you know, well, two things, I suppose. One, I have followed my passion, is that I love doing that detail and those figures, but also a lot of artists just don't like doing them. And I
Mm.
understand why, you know, it's a lot of work. And if you are saying, well, for my rate of pay, I can do a dragon or I can do 50 figures fighting each other, well, you know what, maybe I'd rather just do the dragon or the cool looking dude or something like that, you know, whilst I go, oh no, give me the 50 figures, you know, whatever. So it's great because an art director knows they can come to me
Mm.
and I won't do it reluctantly, I'll do it with passion.
Mm.
You know, so I'll try and give my best work on that piece and I'll enjoy doing it and I won't complain about it, you know. I mean, okay, you like a bit of balance, yes, okay, give me a couple of magic items which I could do a bit quicker or something. So, you know, my workload, the rate does balance out. But yeah, having that niche, I think, is always quite useful for having something distinctive about yourself.
Yeah.
And fortunately, I think that's paid off for me.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a fantastic career and some amazing pieces, Ralph. That, like I
Oh,
say,
well, thank you. That's very
iconic
kind.
stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, I really appreciate you finding the time to chat to me, Ralph. It's been a real joy to explore your career and talk about some of that work. So thank you.
Oh, well, thank you, Jordan. Yeah, it's been a pleasure to talk about it. And yeah, brought back some fun memories, really. And hopefully there's going to be lots more sort of, you know, pieces to come yet. And, you know, I like to think that my craft is continually improving as there's things that I want to do. And yeah, and they're going to involve lots of figures and things going on. Lots of details still.
Fantastic. That's great. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, well, thanks a lot then, Jordan.
Thank you so much, Ralph, for joining me. That was a great conversation. I really, really enjoyed it. If you would like to find out more about Ralph's amazing work and career, you can follow the link in the description to his website. There's loads of awesome stuff on there, well worth a look. And if you would like to support the work that I do, documenting the history of Games Workshop and interviewing the people who brought its worlds to life, then you can check out my Patreon via the link in the description below. Anything you can do to support me is greatly, greatly appreciated. You can check out my interviews on your podcast feeds just by searching for In Conversation with Jordan Sorcery wherever you listen to your podcasts, and you will find it, as well as episodes of the GW Books Club and GW Films Club as well. Thank you once again to Ralph. Thank you for joining us. I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery.